2.4, deductive reasoning. When you're looking at this, there's two properties that we need to know, law of detachment and law of syllogism. When you're talking about detachment, all it's doing is taking, if you have a true conditional statement, so if P then Q is true, and they tell you P is true, automatically Q has to be true. So if you take notes in my class, then you'll pass with an A. If you take notes in my class is true, then you pass with an A, it's got to be true. Okay, now obviously that could not be true. You might fail tests and things, but that's another story. Law of syllogism. If P then Q is true, and Q then R is true, then when you have P has got to be to R is true. That's the law of syllogism. So you're taking two separate statements and saying that if P then Q is true, and if Q then R is true, well then if P then R has to be true. So an example here is if it is July, then you are on summer vacation. And if you are on summer vacation, see how you are on summer vacation matches in both of them, then you work at a smoothie shop, you can conclude that if it's July, then you work at a smoothie shop. Problem 1 is using the law of detachment. Given if a student gets an A on a final, then the student will pass the course. They tell you Felicia got an A on the final. Well, using the law of detachment, a student gets an A on the final, then they pass the course. Well, if Felicia got an A on the final, that means Felicia passed the course. Kind of skip B, so we go to C. If two angles are adjacent, then they share a common vertex. They tell you then that angle 1 and angle 2 share a common vertex. Well, they're not saying they're adjacent. They're not saying that the hypothesis is true. So you can't assume anything about these two. Just because they share a common vertex doesn't mean they're adjacent. Okay? For example, if we have vertical angles that share a common vertex A there, okay, share that vertex A in the middle, those are not adjacent angles, but they do share a common vertex. So you can't, the hypothesis isn't true, therefore we can't say anything about this. Problem 2, using the law of syllogism. What can you conclude from the following? A, given. If a figure is a square, then it is a rectangle. Okay, and then if a figure is a rectangle, then it has 4 sides. Well, what can I conclude? Well, again, I have the conclusion from the first one is the hypothesis in the second one. When that's the case, I can use the law of syllogism to say if a figure is a square, then it has 4 sides. B says given, if you do gymnastics, then you are flexible. The other statement is if you do ballet, then you are flexible. If you notice, the hypotheses are the ones that match. I can't use the law of syllogism there because it has to be the hypothesis from the conclusion from the first and the conclusion or the hypothesis from the second. Let's restart this over again. Notice that the conclusions are the ones that match, not the hypotheses. Okay? So to use the law of syllogism, you have to have the conclusion from the first and the hypothesis from the second to match. I don't have that case here, therefore I can't say anything about this one. Sorry about that mistake.